Quick wait. Nose. How can we forget the nose?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the July edition of Night Skies at Home from the Franklin Institute Science Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My name is Derrick Pitts. I'm the Chief Astronomer and Planetarium Programs Director at Franklin Institute, your cool astronomer. My Twitter handle, by the way, @CoolAstronomer. Your host for our program this evening, Night Skies at Home, for July 2022. This is our 36th edition, believe it or not, of this program, and we're so glad that you have chosen to join us this evening to learn about astronomy and the evening skies for this summer. We have a lot we're going to cover tonight, and I think you'll find it all really exciting and interesting, so we invite you to sit back and relax and join us for the program that we're going to run for you tonight. So here we are. Right at the almost midsummer. We're getting there. It's going to be a little bit before we get to midsummer, but I know we're feeling the heat all across the country. And of course, that means that we recognize what season this is. And summer, of course, is a really good time to be out under the evening skies, trying to get a good look at what's available to be seen in the evening skies at this time for this year. Now, what we talk about in the evening skies is not just for the Philadelphia area where the Franklin Institute is located, but it's really good all across the country. If we go a little bit too far to the north, we'll find that we'll miss a little bit of the southern sky. And if we go too far to the south, we'll lose a little bit of the northern sky. But as it turns out, for most of us across the country, we'll be able to see what we talk about here. Everybody will be able to see what we talk about here without much difficulty at all. Of course, we have to compensate for the time differences from East Coast to West Coast, but not very much else. In fact, one really interesting thing about what we describe in the night sky tonight for where we are on this planet at what's called 40 degrees north latitude, 40 degrees above the equator, any location on the planet that's around this latitude will be able to see what we speak of this evening. So it's good for everybody all around the world at this particular latitude. So if you live further north, the one problem you'll begin to run into is that, of course, it gets darker a lot later than it does for folks that live further south. And if you live too far south, well, I'd almost say, in fact, we could say, all the way down at the South Pole, it's not going to get dark at all this time of year. It's the land of the midnight sun right now for the South Pole. I'm sorry, for the North Pole of the planet. And for the South Pole of the planet, it's really winter and dark for them. But as you get toward the tropics, that's where I'm really headed. As you get toward the tropics, a really interesting thing happens. And that is that the sun rises and sets at approximately the same time all through the year. So there won't be any advantage for long summer evenings in the tropics, although since it's tropical, I guess you could say the evenings are always warm and tropical. But sunset won't come late. Sunset will still happen between 6 and 7 p.m. every night throughout the course of the year. So those are some of the differences in what the sky will look like as you observe. So as we're getting ready to really ramp up our program here, I just want to say good evening to everyone who's joining us. This is Night Skies at the Observatory. Night Skies at the Observatory is the Franklin Institute's home-based astronomy program that stands in place of our standard Night Skies at the Observatory program, which is a regular monthly program we've been doing at the Franklin Institute since, I guess maybe 2012 or so. And this is a program in which we invite our audience, our visitors, our guests, to come join us in person at the Franklin Institute, where we pull together all of our astronomy resources so that you can have a really wonderful, interactive, if you will, experience with astronomy. We have our rooftop observing deck, where we set up 5 telescopes. We have our rooftop main observatory, where we have our one large refracting telescope. We have our planetarium on the first floor, and we always add additional activities, programs, and interactives in our space exhibit on the first floor as well. Putting all these things together, it makes for a really wonderful evening of astronomy content for everybody in the family. So hopefully we will get back to doing those programs up sometime in the not too distant future when we can have you back as a guest at the museum. In the meantime, this program is to encourage you to go outside and observe the evening skies yourselves right where you're located. So you can do this whether you're in a center city environment, if you're in a suburban environment, and especially if you're in a rural environment. And I'm really describing areas where the night lighting conditions get better and better as you move further and further out. But if you live in an urban area, don't despair. You may have heard messages about the impossibility or the great challenge to seeing a really lovely night sky because there's too much city light. Well, in fact, the way it works out is that the city light helps to make it easier to identify the brightest stars of the sky by getting rid of all the background stars that may be smaller and maybe dimmer and that may confuse you. So this way, you see only the brightest objects available: the moon, the bright stars, the bright planets, and maybe one or two bright clusters of stars, all available and visible, along with those common asterisms, star shapes that you know and love, like the Big Dipper, like the Big Dipper. There we go, the Big Dipper, or the Summer Triangle, or maybe Scorpius, for example, and other well-known star shapes. You can see those in an urban environment. As you move further and further out, you'll be able to identify or see dimmer and dimmer objects. But no matter where you are, you can see something. And this actually includes things like International Space Station and other satellites that are orbiting our planet. You'll be able to see all those. So this evening, what are we up to this evening? Well, we have a lot to talk about. As I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about an interesting astronomical event that I really like referring to called aphelion. Aphelion. If you'd like to look that word up before I get to the definition of that, please do so. You'll find it's a really interesting concept, aphelion, and it's something that is specific to this time of year. It can't happen at any other time of year, but it always happens right around, believe it or not, you ready for this? July 4th every year, but it doesn't have anything to do with patriotism or the founding of countries and nations and things like that. It's all astronomical aphelion. We're also going to talk about James Webb Space Telescope. I have an update to bring you on that and something to look forward to in the future for events happening with James Webb. We'll also talk about the Space Launch System rocket. We'll also talk about the Artemis project, that is NASA's latest project in which our program to return astronauts to the moon, and the SLS rocket system is a major component of that. And there's been some big stuff happening with that this summer too, with more exciting stuff coming up later this summer. So we want to bring you up to speed on that. And also, our special treat tonight is that we're going to chat with rocket engineer Brandon Burroughs from Boeing. And tonight, Brandon and I are going to talk about rockets of the future. And I'm so excited about this because, you know, this is a real opportunity for me to geek out with a real rocket scientist talking about rockets of the future. So we'll talk a little bit about propulsion systems. We'll do some comparison to what we know already, but we also want to encourage you to just sort of free think and fantasize about what you think a rocket system of the future might be like, both outside for, you know, how the rocket moves along, and also what it might look like on the inside, how you might design a rocket that's really built for either interplanetary travel or interstellar, maybe even intergalactic travel. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Of course, we'll talk about what's up in the sky, what you can see this evening, and we'll also talk about as I said, all those things that you can see in the evening sky. We'll talk a bit about International Space Station too. So we also are looking for a couple of things from you. What are your questions about astronomy tonight? Let us know. If you have a question about astronomy, if you'll put it into the chat, that would be great. I'm sorry, put it into the chat. If you put it into the comments box, that'll be great. My technical producer will grab hold of that and send it over to my studio producer, Linda, who's sitting right here. Say hi, Linda.
Hello, everybody.
There's our studio producer. She's waiting for your questions, so please send it along. And at the same time, we'd also like to know where you're listening to this program. So please let us know where you are listening to this program. We'd love to find that out. We want to know what the skies are like, where you are, what kinds of things you're seeing, and maybe even point out some specific things for you where you are observing from. So please let us know. Where are you as you're listening to this program? So let's just do some sky phenomenon really quickly, just to cover what's happening at this time of this year for the basic stuff of the sky. So for us, one of the most important things is sunrise and sunset. Right now, sunrise is coming at 5:39 a.m. 5:39 a.m. That's for this latitude of 40 degrees north. And sunset comes at 8:31 p.m. 8:31 p.m. Now, if you may have caught some of these numbers earlier from our last program, you might recognize that the numbers have changed already. In fact, that sunrise time, it's 6 minutes later than it was about a month ago, I think, 6 minutes later. And the sunset time, that's already, I think, 5 minutes earlier than it was last time. So I hate to break the news to you folks, but guess what? We're already starting to lose minutes on the day of sunlight. We're only about not even quite a month away from summer solstice, and already we're beginning to lose time. So don't waste your time. Get out and enjoy these warm summer days and evenings because of the amount of sunlight that we have right now. It's great to be out in the evening. So we really encourage you to get out and do that. Let's see, here's that word, aphelion, that I mentioned. Did you take a moment to look it up and figure out what it is? Well, guess what? Aphelion, I'm going to tell you, is a really cool concept about the Earth's motion around the sun. Here we are on July 7th. You ready for this? We are at our most distant point from the sun for the entire year. Yes, it seems counterintuitive for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere that our planet is actually at its greatest distance away from the sun, more than 94 million miles away. The average distance is 93. We're more than 94 million miles away from the sun. But because of the axial tilt of the planet, the northern portion of the planet is tilted toward the sun. And the more direct rays of sunlight coming from the sun falling on the Earth increases the solar gain at the surface, the energy gain at the surface. And what that means for us is that we get greater heating at this time of year because of the greater number of hours of daylight. That makes it even warmer. And here we are now with such a, with summer warmth at this time of the year for us in the Northern Hemisphere. Opposite in the Southern Hemisphere, this is now the winter season. So aphelion is that closest point to the sun. I'm sorry, aphelion is when the Earth is at its greatest distance from the sun. Whew, man, got to keep those things straight. And it always occurs on July 4th. Always occurs right around July 4th, I should say. There's some slight variations in that, 12 hours or so, but not very much. Now, when do we reach that closest point to the sun? We reach that closest point to the sun in early January every year. So right around January 3rd or January 4th, that's when the Earth is at its closest to the sun. But then the northern portion of the Earth is tilted away from the sun. So the amount of energy reaching the surface in the northern hemisphere is spread across the surface a little wider. And so the energy gain goes down. We don't have as many hours of daylight, so there's not as much heating, and it's cooler in the north. Conversely, it's warmer in the south. So it's summertime for them when it's winter for us. So here we are at aphelion when the Earth is at its greatest distance from the sun. So I always think of that as a really cool time of year. It really is just an instant in time, though. It happened early in the morning on July 4th, but we were only there for a few brief seconds. As the Earth continues in its orbit around the sun, we're now increasing that distance. We're now collapsing that distance between Earth and the sun. The moon right now is a waxing gibbous phase. Waxing gibbous, it's about 9 days old. So in another 5 days, we'll be right at full moon or so. So that means next Wednesday, maybe it's a little more than that, 6 days. Next Wednesday, the 13th of July, we'll be at full moon. Be a great night to be out if the sky is clear to enjoy the bright moonlight in midsummer. Get out and enjoy that if you can. And we have great stuff to see in the evening sky this month, really wonderful stuff. We got great constellations, great planets all available to see in the sky. So let's take a moment right now just to check and see who's listening from where. Wow, how about this? My studio producer, thank you very much, Linda, tells me that we have folks listening to us from the Pocono Mountains, from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, from Delaware, from Folsom, Pennsylvania, from Virginia, from Nashua, New Hampshire. Hi, Nashua. I've known some folks up there for a while. From Rensselaer Falls, New York. I think I know some folks in Rensselaer Falls, New York. Say hi to them. Have you on board. Folks in Haddonfield, New Jersey, that's a great location too. And of course, right here in Center City, Philadelphia. Yeah, so we have a lot of people from all over. I really appreciate the folks calling in or listening in from Virginia, from Nashua, from Rensselaer, from Haddonfield, Center City, Montgomery County, from Folsom, PA, from Delaware, and from the Poconos. We really appreciate you listening to us this evening, and we hope you pick up something this evening that you'll find interesting enough that'll get you outside to observe the night sky. So what are we looking for in the night sky? Let's just take a quick turn around that, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So we have these great constellations I was mentioning, the summer constellations. Let's just talk about the planets for a hot minute. You heard earlier this summer that there was a lineup of bright planets that was available to be seen. And that lineup of planets is still occurring in the pre-dawn sky over in the southeastern portion of the sky. But I have to tell you, the planets are now stretched out in a much longer line than they were before. So instead of them being close together, they're really stretched out along a much longer line that goes from the eastern horizon almost around to the southern horizon. But if you're up before sunrise, you can still catch these bright planets. You don't need a telescope. Binoculars, of course, are helpful and easy to use. But if you'd like to have a little bit of morning adventure, take your telescope outside and get a look at these planets. Of course, Jupiter and Saturn always look great. Venus will be the brightest one of the four that you see. Mars has a slightly rosy color, not red, but rosy color. Mercury was part of that batch a little bit earlier this month, but Mercury has become much more a challenge to see because it's so close to the sun. Its orbit is so close to the sun that it really doesn't spend very much time up out of the murk of sunlight. That would make it easier to see. So don't worry about that one, but try to catch the other four. As I said, there are International Space Station passes. We'll talk about those when we get a star map out, and we'll point that out when we look at a map of exactly where we can see that. Okay, great. So let me just take a break at the moment and see if we have any questions from our audience, just to see if there's anything out there. We'll see what we have. We do have questions, my studio producer says. What do we have, Linda?
Anthony wants to know, do you have any idea what the first images will be revealed from the JWST?
Anthony wants to know. Let's talk about first images from JWST, James Webb Space Telescope. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, Anthony. So if you can hold on, I'm actually going to show you an image that has been, how do I say it? It was an image that was generated as a test image, and they weren't originally going to keep that image or release that for anybody to see. But they did release it, and I have that image, and I'll show it to you in just a few minutes and tell you a little bit about that image. So hold on, and we'll get to that. Thanks a lot, because I do want to do that James Webb Space Telescope update. What else is up?
Mike would like to know, will he be able to see the comet on the 14th?
Oh, Mike wants to know about the comet. Yes, you know, there's a comet that has been seen in the evening skies, and Mike wants to know if he'll be able to see it on the 14th of this month, on July 14th. This particular comet reaches its closest approach to Earth on the 14th of July. And you would assume that because of that, we'd be able to see it really well. Well, as it turns out, unfortunately, this comet is not very bright at all. And the other really unfortunate thing is that it's quite a distance away from us. I think if I remember the numbers correctly, I think even at its closest approach, it's about 200 million miles away. And so that means we aren't going to be able to see it very well. Let me just check and make sure about that number, Mike. But I know it's a long ways off. And that means that it will not be receiving enough light from the sun to be reflected from its coma and from its tails to make it easy for us to see. It reaches perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, in December this year. But this is going to be about as close as it gets to us and about as bright as it gets to us. And even in this close approach on the 14th, it's still going to be way down below naked eye visibility. So you'll need clear, dark skies, a medium-sized telescope, and a good star chart to find it. So it's not going to be one of the brightest comets we've ever seen, but it is in the sky. And if you have dark skies and a good telescope and a good star map, you might be able to catch a view of it. Just don't expect to be wowed by it. That's the only thing I'll say. So that's one. We also have listeners tonight from Baltimore, from Vineland, from Jeffersonville, Vermont. Hello there, Jeffersonville. Glad to have you. And we also have folks checking us out from South Philadelphia. Yeah, there are great spots in South Philadelphia to look at the evening sky. So don't count yourselves out in terms of what you can see. So we'll do one more question. Linda, what do we have?
Okay, well, Alan from downtown Philly said you can easily see the first quarter moon through the scattered clouds this evening.
Oh, Alan, thank you very much for the report. He says you can easily see the first quartered moon through scattered clouds. Yes. And by the way, thanks for bringing that up, Alan. This is really the best time to observe the moon when it's at first quarter, especially with a telescope, because you have just the correct amount and angle of sunlight striking the lunar surface to make the surface appear as if it has dimension. The shadows that are created by crater rims and mountaintops on the moon, those shadows allow us to see more of a three-dimensional sort of a view of the moon. So we can see height and we can see depth, and the lighting is just right for that. If you wait until full moon, when there's full sunlight on the surface, there are no shadows, and so you can't see dimension. And the other thing is, observing the full moon through a telescope, I gotta tell you, it's really bright. I mean, almost painfully bright. So I do not recommend observing the moon at its full phase through a telescope. Do it at first quarter. Alan suggests that this is a great night to see it. You can see it through scattered clouds. I'd go with Alan's suggestion about checking out the moon now. This is the safest time to do it, actually, and you get the most bang for your buck because you can see the elevation and you can see the depth of craters. So try that. Thanks a lot for that, Alan. Greatly appreciate it. Okay, folks, we'll come back and do some more questions a little bit later. And if we don't get to your question, don't worry. I'll make sure that I pull it up out of the comments and answer you directly. So we'll make sure to get back to you. Okay, we have a bunch of other stuff we're going to do tonight. But right now, I want to get to what I think is going to be the most exciting part of our program. I'd like to bring in our guest for this evening. Folks, I got to tell you, I'm really excited to have this guest with us. He's been with us once before, and over this past spring, I've had the pleasure of spending some more time with him as he's been in Philadelphia. He doesn't live in Philadelphia, but through the magic of Zoom and the internet, we can bring him to Philly and join us for our program this evening. So we're going to talk about the future of rocketry with rocket engineer Brandon Burroughs. So please welcome Brandon to our program tonight. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us here tonight.
Thanks for inviting me once again. It's glad to be back and glad to have another conversation with you.
Well, I really hope you're looking forward to talking about rockets. I think you have a little bit of an interest in rockets, is that right?
Yeah, just a little bit. For the past 5 or 6 years, that's kind of been my life, day in and day out. So yeah, just been working on rockets a lot, getting my hands dirty, and building some history at the same time. So having a good time.
That's great. So Brandon, do us a favor and just give us a quick run through of the kind of work that you do as a rocket engineer.
Yeah. So since I was an intern, I actually interned with Boeing as a stress analyst for the Space Launch System program, which is a NASA program, where we're looking forward to sending the next manned, first woman, and first person of color to the moon here in the near future. So that's been really great, and I've been doing that for about 5 years or so. Basically, I've done everything from write requirements, do stress analysis, all the way to actually physically working on the vehicle, and then working on the manufacturing floor. So it's been really great, really exciting journey. And I'm just super glad that we're getting ready to launch this thing in the near future.
So wait a minute, you're like a real hands-on rocket guy.
Yeah, I love hardware. I think for me, that's my favorite part. I love getting down and dirty and understanding what I've done, on the computer, how that transferring over to the real life hardware. So to me, that's the really exciting part, is getting up and close. And also too, it's just cool to see how big some of this stuff is. I think that always is a big thing for me. I used to work on jet engines and stuff like that, and that was big. I thought that was huge, but a rocket engine, or just a rocket in general, is just totally different when it comes to scale. So pretty cool work.
Well, Brandon, can you also take a second to tell us a little more about SLS as a rocket, and let's kind of use that and that technology as a jumping off point for our discussion about future stuff.
Yeah. No, so SLS is a rocket that utilizes chemical propulsion, which is something we've I would say we understand very well. We've been doing it for since the 60s. So, but basically what that means is you take a oxidizer, liquid oxygen, and some type of fuel, in our case for the Space Launch System, that being liquid hydrogen, and you mix it. And once you mix it, it creates a explosion, a controlled explosion. And that explosion is channeled into thrust, and it actually pushes the rocket into the sky and eventually into space. So that's kind of what we do now, is we use chemical rockets, and that's kind of the standard for the most part when it comes to launch vehicles across the industry.
Great. So this is so what you're talking about then is, as you said, really the standard for the state of the art, I guess, not necessarily the state of the art, but the standard kind of rocket system that's used these days for people trying to get off the planet heading into space.
Yep. I mean, it's kind of like the status quo at this point. But again, like we're going to talk about today, there's always someone looking down the road and what can we do in the future? Because again, this before the early 1900s, we didn't have too much understanding about how to get to space, and eventually we did. So that was someone looking down the road and saying, hey, we need to keep working on this technology so we can do it one day, and someone's doing the same now.
Well, that's cool. So that's great. So let's do this. I'm going to share my screen, Brandon, and I just want to bring up a few images that we can use as a way to sort of jump off with folks about, all right, I have a little issue here that I have to deal with, believe it or not. I'm going to see if I can deal with it here without too much difficulty. Let me see if I can make this happen really quickly. See if I can get it to work. If not, I'll have to invent a different way to go about this. There we go. I see. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I can't deal with that right now. And you know what, folks, it's going to preclude me from actually sharing my screen as I wanted to. Let me try this one more time just to see if I can make this work somehow. Just a moment. So Brandon, when was the last time you actually, you know what you can tell us about actually while I'm trying to do this? Can you tell us a little bit about the last test that SLS went through that was going to be prior to what's coming up later this summer?
Yeah. So we just completed a successful wet dress rehearsal. And basically what that means is you're rolling the actual fully integrated vehicle. Again, everything's basically there, ready to go. And you're rolling it out to the launch pad. You put it on the launch pad and you fuel it. You fuel it with all of the liquid oxygen, all of the liquid hydrogen, which to some people may just seem like, oh, you just, pull some lever and then the fuel just falls in and it just works out, right? Well, these are cryogenic fuels. So, I mean, a lot of them are like negative, 400, negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is a different type of fluid that has to stay cold from the beginning of its tank that it's coming out of through the pipes that's going towards the vehicle. There's a lot of thermodynamics involved in that. So again, it's just not dropping liquid into a open volume. So those are the kind of problems we have to work through when we're doing a test like this. And actually we had to do this a few times because of such problems, because you have leaks, things like that. But we finally got ourselves fully tanked and we were able to get down to T minus, I think, 29 seconds, which is really good. And it's one of those things where you basically want to do a full test from top to bottom, tanking all the way to right before you're going to press the button and light those engines. So we were able to test that and we feel confident that we can move on. And the next time we roll out to the pad, launch the vehicle. So looking forward to that.
And when does it look like that might happen?
Right now, it's really hard to say. We definitely have some things we have to look at, and definitely working for Boeing. It's one of those things where we assist with putting the vehicle together. We actually are people that manufactured the vehicle, but we have sent, the core stage of the vehicle, but we have turned it over to NASA. So we actually have no say in when it gets launched and stuff. So NASA is the person that kind of coordinates that and decides and makes the last call on, hey, we're ready to launch. So when that'll be, not 100% sure, but I know for myself, I'm really hoping to see that thing happen before the end of the year. So that's my personal thing. I really hope to see it before the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too. This is the largest rocket that we've built since the Saturn V days, and so a launch of this would be really exciting for that reason, but also really exciting because this is going to be the system, as you said, that's going to take the next folks back to the moon. So really excited to see something like that happen. I'm going to, folks, I have to admit the problem I'm having is there's a little permission issue with my computer and what I wanted to do. So I'm going to see if we can figure out a way to get that sharing to happen so that you can follow, make it easier for you to follow along with us. Mea culpa, please excuse me for not getting that done earlier or even knowing it was happening. So anyway, we'll be fine. All right, so Brandon, let's talk a little bit about what we might see going forward in the future of rocketry. Now, we talked about the chemical rockets. What other kinds of systems are there in existence right now that are actually being used for rocket propulsion?
So I think one good thing to kind of start off and kind of level set, every environment has a different capability that's needed to overcome it, right? So one of the reasons, even though it's the status quo right now to use chemical rockets, one of the reasons we continue to use it, it is great to get us out of the gravity well of Earth. It's just, it gives you high thrust, doesn't last for a very long time, but it gives you all the thrust you need to just get you away from Earth, which is somewhat hard. But let's say we were launching from the moon, we wouldn't necessarily need all of that thrust because we have 1/6 the gravity, we don't have the atmosphere to go through and things like that. So when you look at it like that, I think it's also great to consider what environment you're in. So I think right now, chemical rockets are kind of king right now on Earth, getting from Earth to low Earth orbit. But chemical is not king once you're in space. And we use chemical rockets in space. It's pretty okay, but there's a lot of other things you can look into. So for instance, ion drives, that's a really good thing to look into. And that's basically taking some type of propellant, commonly xenon, something like that, and ionizing it, shooting it out the back, and boom, your satellite or whatever your vehicle is goes forward and does whatever maneuver you wanted to do. So that's very common for satellites.
But wait, what's the advantage of that though?
Yeah, so basically xenon is one of those things where you don't need as much of that fuel to make it go for a long time. Whereas with chemical rockets, you need a ton of fuel just to let it go for a little while. So for a vehicle the size of like a satellite, you can just mount just a little bit of xenon on that. Maybe you have some large solar panels to create electricity. And that electricity then ionizes that xenon and boom, it pushes it around the planet or wherever you want it to go. Also too, ion thrusters have a very high, what they call ISP, or specific impulse. And what's good about a specific impulse is, and it's a kind of a weird thing because like its units are seconds. You're like measuring like how something moves in seconds. So that's kind of odd, but basically what it means is I can use X amount of fuel to go to accelerate for this long. So it's basically like the change in momentum per unit of mass of fuel or something like that. Mm-hmm. So if you can basically accelerate for a very, very long time, you can go very, very far. Whereas with like chemical rockets where you can't accelerate for that long, you accelerate and then you coast. You get no more acceleration, no more nothing. That's just kind of where you max out. But when you have something like an ion drive, you can just kind of keep going for a pretty long time, depending on how much fuel you have.
Well, that sounds like an interesting technology to be able to use. I understand that kind of technology being used already?
Yeah, so a lot of satellites use it. But I will say right now, like I said before, it has a high specific impulse, but that does not mean it has a high thrust. And I think sometimes people have a hard time understanding that. So back to the chemical rockets, not as high specific impulse, but its thrust is super high. When you want to break a gravity well or get the delta V to actually break the orbit of a planet, you need that high. So if you try to use like an ion drive on the Earth's surface, you wouldn't go anywhere. You don't have the thrust to go anywhere. So yeah, that's one of the things where I think when it comes to bigger vehicles in the future, we are actually considering using ion drives, but we need much bigger and more powerful ion drives. So we are working on those things behind closed doors. A lot of people are working on those things behind closed doors to make sure that technology comes around.
Well, let's just jump forward and get right to, what many people would think is the real exciting stuff about future space travel. And if we think about chemical rockets and we think about ion propulsion systems as maybe something that we can use to get around the solar system. But if we want to go like real distances out in space, everybody has some excitement about a system that would make it possible for us to not only travel long distances, but also do it in a relatively short period of time. So in science fiction, it always seems as if there's a propulsion system that someone invents somehow that makes it possible for us to find some shortcut across the galaxy or some shortcut across the universe. And typically it involves something that gets us close to the speed of light as a way to quickly get across these huge distances. So I think maybe one of the systems that people are most familiar with is something like what gets used in the Star Trek series of programs, that whole universe of what's called warp drive. There's one. And we know that there's some sort of system that's being used in the Star Wars system, but we don't hear too much about that. But in the Star Trek world, warp drive is almost a character in and of itself. So is there anything like that that's on a drawing board somewhere, or a twinkle in someone's eye about the possibility of being able to get us around any faster?
Yeah, I think for anyone that works in propulsion, I really can't speak for everyone, but I feel pretty confident in the fact that I think we all were inspired by warp drive to a certain extent. If you work in propulsion, kind of like the holy grail, right? And we see it again, like you said, on so many sci-fi series like Star Trek and stuff like that. But when it comes down to the science, we just have not figured it out. We're not even 100% sure if it's even possible, but we're hoping. I think when it boils down to warp drive, again, it's hard to explain something that isn't actually real, but from my understanding, yeah, so it's like I can't explain it, because it's like if I can explain it, then I'll be rich right now, because I'll
Wait, what do you mean? You could just make it up as you go along, and it can be the Burroughs warp drive system. That's fine,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that'd be great, but I'm not there for sure. But from my understanding, what you're kind of doing, and why they call it warp drive, is you're warping space and time. You're literally making the time of like the space in front of you shorter. So some people say, let's travel that distance. And then some people are underneath the thought of, instead of traveling that distance, how about we shrink that distance? We actually warp the space-time that's around you. And that's where warp drive kind of gets its name kind of from. But also too, that takes a ton of energy. And energy gets you every time. Anytime you start talking about light speed, you're almost talking about infinite energy to get there. And that's if you can keep whatever you built together, as you even get to those speeds. So it's a lot of problems there, but energy is definitely one of the biggest factors in any of these propulsion issues. Is we got to figure out a more efficient way to harness energy. And one thing that a lot of people are talking about, but always seems about 20 years away, is nuclear fusion propulsion. Yeah, so that's definitely an energy source that we do believe is theoretically possible. And I think that will be the next big step towards something like a warp drive, is getting the energy source that can allow us to do something like that.
So wait, you mean, I thought we could just mine dilithium from some, other planet someplace and, throw that into the matter-antimatter pods and off we go.
Yeah, right. I think, and that's why we have to explore, right? Because you never know what you're going to find on the side of some moon out by, I don't know, Saturn or something. You just never know what you're going to find out that could actually help us out. So, yeah, but I mean, it's just one of those things where we're just not there yet. And I like that you bring up antimatter. That's definitely something that we are taking big looks at. But the problem with antimatter is you can't really produce a lot of it, because it takes a lot of energy to produce a lot of it. So if that's going to be your fuel to take you from here to the nearest star system, you're going to need more than a few particles of it, So yeah. There's a few struggles there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do this, Brandon. My technical producer might have come up with a workaround
Yay.
for me to share the screen. So I'm going to ask Katie if she wants to give it a shot. Folks, if you'll hang on with us here, we're going to see if we can do some little bit of tech magic and see if we can make something like this happen. If it doesn't work out, not all of the magic in the Harry Potter world of things always works, but we'll see. Well, look what we have here. This looks good, Katie. Thank you very much. Folks, if you can see this, I'll check with my studio producer here. Can you see that image, hon?
Now I can.
There we go. Okay, great. So I think everybody, you can see it too, Brandon, right?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, so folks, let me just describe this for you. The image that you're seeing here is an image and artwork created by a space artist from the 1940s and 50s named Chesley Bonestell. You may have seen images like this that were created for the beginning of the space program as inspiration for people to begin thinking about what it meant for us at that time to, start exploring space. I really like this image. I chose this image. I really like this image because of the way the illumination is on this planet. So what we're seeing is we're seeing the Earth in the sky there. This, I believe, is meant to be the moon. And we can see some astronauts out on the surface with some instruments, and we can see the rocket standing there. And this rocket shape just, screams classic design of fast and acceleration and exploration and romance and all those sorts of things. And I don't know about you, Brandon, but it certainly conjures up that sense of, we're going someplace and it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I know for me, I love these type of images. And I don't know if you guys can see behind me when I'm talking, I have a lot of old concept art behind me as well. And what I find interesting about this is you can always kind of tell these images are like before the 60s and stuff when we started really understanding rocketry, because there's like tons of fins and wings everywhere. That's something I always and once you really get to like flying in space, you start realizing like if you're going to the moon, you don't really have much of a need for wings because there's not atmosphere to like use the wings. But what it also makes me think of is this vehicle is made to come back to Earth or made to go somewhere with the atmosphere. So I think that's cool to think about. It's like, oh, this isn't just for the moon. It's also meant to go somewhere else, maybe that can utilize those wings and things like that. So it's always cool to me.
Good point. Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. I've always written this off because it's so impractical for travel in space because of the wings. But again, I really like the fanciful image. Katie, can we go to the next one, please? So in these images, what we hope to do is to sort of like provide for folks just an idea of what some of these images look like. Here's another one of those fanciful images that shows the Earth in the background, and you can see there's a rocket ship over on the left-hand side there, and you can see a space station, the classic shape for a space station from the 1950s and 60s, the wheel space station that's been depicted in so many different space movies. But you can just tell from the stylized view of this what era this is from. And again, it conjures up all of those great ideas about us becoming a truly spacefaring civilization, because this indicates that we have a high level of sophistication about space travel. I can't quite understand how that spacecraft is supposed to dock with this space station exactly, but I don't think we were meant to really worry about that, Brandon. I think it was just to sort of elicit this feeling and sense of being in space.
I agree. I love it. It looks great.
Yeah. Let's move on, Katie. I know we've been spending a lot of time here, but I want to make sure our audience gets to see some more of these ideas, because we want our audience really to start thinking about what it means to do this kind of space travel. So with some fantasy. So here's This is a classic, iconic view of a chemical rocket. This is a Saturn V launch vehicle that carried people to the moon in the 60s. I'm sure you know all about this, Brandon.
Yeah, I love this vehicle. I mean, it's what got us to the moon, and I think there was something like 13 or so launches in all of the Saturn V. But man, it really was just the pioneer and the pathfinder for everything that has come after it when it comes to human space travel. So
Yeah. Yeah, truly iconic. Next, please, Katie. I think the other thing I remember about these launches is that all of them worked nearly flawlessly. Yeah, for such a complex system. And it was described as one of the most complex systems ever built, followed by this really complex system. This is the Space Transportation System, what we know as the Space Shuttle. And this used the same kind of configuration as well of a chemical booster system that was used to lift heavy payloads off the surface of the Earth out of the gravity well. So we're all kind of familiar with that.
And also, too, you can see again, there's wings on this, and that should always go back to, oh, this thing is returning. It's going somewhere with the atmosphere where you saw like, oh, the Saturn V didn't have any wings because it wasn't, the vehicle itself wasn't coming back. So I always think that's, again, pretty cool. And I also think it's cool that this was the first manned vehicle, because we had plenty of manned test vehicles before, but they would usually test them first before putting people inside of it. Space Shuttle, they went straight to it. There was never like a test space shuttle flight with no people in it. They did it on the STS-1, they put astronauts in it. So that's the type of confidence they had. And I always think that's pretty unique about this program.
Audacious, I'd say.
Yes.
Very much so. Next, please, Katie. So now let's see where we're going next. I think we're gonna head off into some more fantastic stuff. So let's see where we get to here, because we want to try to get to that. Oh yes, here we are with SLS, the system that you've been working on, and again, chemical system meant to get us back to the moon, and then be part of the system that might eventually push us on toward Mars, but certainly part of the beginning there. And next,
also,
please, Katie.
Yep.
That image has all of those nice parts and pieces of, kids looking up at the moon at the night sky with the moon in the picture and Mars in the picture and the rocket possibly taking. So here's, I thought I'd throw in an image of an ion engine so that people might have some image that goes with that. And thanks a lot for pointing out that the element xenon might be the fuel that would be used to provide this low thrust over a long period of time to gain velocity. That's great. Next, please, Katie. Oh yeah, and I thought I'd throw this image in there too of a number of satellites that use an electric propulsion of some type. I didn't really want everybody to kind of read exactly everything that's here, but just to give a sense that there are a lot of satellites that are using a different kind of propulsion system. So we can go on, Katie. We can get to the next one. Brandon, do you ever take time to think about some sort of a propulsion system you might like to dream up?
I think for me, a lot of times I get stuck in the idea of hybridizing different systems. That's kind of like what I love to think about is how can we take a system and put a bunch of other systems together, and when it's the optimal time for that system, use it. So I think if I mentioned before last time that we were on our show that on your show that I want to be a captain of my own starship. My starship would be hybridized. I think I have different systems for different applications.
Yeah. Okay. Great. This is one I also wanted to throw in the solar sail concept, one in which a spacecraft has an enormous sail made of very, very thin but flexible material that catches photons of light from the sun and just pushes the spacecraft along. And I think I have a couple of examples of this. Katie, you can go to the next slide for a few seconds and then go to the next slide after that. And this is a system that people are beginning to test out, and maybe maybe there's a really good application. Here's a Japanese test version called Ikaros, which makes a lot of sense because it's connected to the sun. So I'm not sure that this is a translation for Icarus, the story of Icarus with the wax wings from Greek mythology, flying close to the sun, so to speak. But here you can see there's a spacecraft right in the center there, and you can see the sail around it. And through a project called Breakthrough Starshot, a Russian billionaire, Yuri Milner, has put $100 million into a project for a 25-year trip to Alpha Centauri at 20% of the speed of light using this kind of technology. And the idea is that you use a gigantic flexible sail made of a flexible metallic material. And what it does is it catches pulses from a laser on the surface of the Earth that will repeatedly hit the sail and blast along really a microchip-sized spacecraft, if you will. And this is really just a microchip that has imaging, communications, navigation capability. And because the mass is so small and the energy pulses are so high, you can drive this sail up towards the speed of light at some significant percentage of the speed of light, 20%, and get you out to the next closest star to us, which is about 4 light years away, in about 25 years. And that's a real improvement. But that's one of those technologies out there in the future.
Derrick, to throw out there, there's also talk about one day having these solar system highways that basically have these high power lasers that are in orbit in different spots along the solar system that can actually power different vehicles that are already in space by solar cell by just pointing those lasers and shooting it to the next, I guess, laser station, and then carries it on, because you lose intensity as it gets further away. So yeah, I think that's a pretty cool concept, but we will need the infrastructure for that.
It'll be a little while before they get there, before we get there, but it's a great concept to kind of push along. Next, please, Katie. And I think one of the things I love about the idea of speculating about these different possibilities is it drives people to think more about what the possibilities are. You talked about nuclear propulsion just a few minutes ago, and
because this is Project Orion, which is, again, never happened, but it was a cool concept. Like he said, just taking the time to just think about some cool stuff and giving it a try. But basically the concept here is you have a ship that has nuclear bombs, like actual nuclear bombs, loaded inside of the ship. And those bombs will drop through the center and out the back. And you have this big, like, what they call a pulsar plate on the back that absorbs the energy of an exploding bomb, and that will push the vehicle forward. So it's an interesting concept. Never really got off the ground, but still interesting.
Yeah, we'll go to the next slide, but the whole concept of this is to try to figure out a way to increase our velocity and maybe shrink some of the distances between Earth and some other places in a way that will allow humans to travel to some of these places within a lifetime, if you will. And this particular concept that we're looking at here now, this is not exactly an ion propulsion system, but this is the type of system that actually collects hydrogen as it flies through space through a big collector on the front end. And the collector is depicted on the left side of this big thing. And you can see the purple streams coming into the collector. And the idea is that you collect this hydrogen as you're flying through space and use that as a fuel for propulsion. And so you're essentially harvesting your fuel as you fly along. So this is not something that's happening right now, but it's an idea that somebody's been generating. Next, please, Katie. And then I think, maybe a little bit later, we can see some of these. Maybe this is one that people are familiar with, the Firefly Serenity spacecraft. I don't think I know what the propulsion system is here.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, and I've definitely seen Serenity quite a few times. And it gets hard sometimes in the fantasy world, because sometimes they just throw a name out there. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure either what the propulsion system on this one is.
Next, please, Katie. But I threw it in there because I know a lot of people know of the Firefly program and the Serenity spacecraft. And so, that ability to travel around becomes an integral part of the story. And, as this image, points out, and we mentioned before, warp drive is a really important component because, as the slide indicates, it allows the storyline to get anywhere within the 48 minutes of story time that's available in the 1-hour program. So, these ideas of how it works and how fast warp drive or warp speed really is, it's all part of the fantasy, but that fantasy, does a lot to drive people to think more about the possibilities of what we can do. Next, please, Katie. Now, I don't know how much of a science fiction fan you are, actually, Brandon, but have there been propulsion systems? Oh yeah, everybody knows that image. Thanks, Katie. We can go to the next one. Have there been systems in any science fiction that you have read that seem more plausible than others, or?
I would say, so yeah, I'm a big science fiction nerd. So much that I'll say it. I have the phrase "live long and prosper." I've been tattooed down my spine in Vulcan script. So yes, I am a sci-fi fan.
You are, yes, okay.
But I've seen in certain sci-fi this thing called what they call what do you call it? Mass drivers. I love the concept of a mass driver. It's very simple, and basically what it means, everyone, is it's kind of like, imagine if you're on the moon, again, no atmosphere, low gravity, and you have a roller coaster. In a roller coaster, you usually start off low and you go up high, and then you go over the hump, and you go on the roller coaster. Imagine once you get up to the hump that the roller coaster just ends. So it's just a ramp. Well, that's kind of how a mass driver is. It just speeds up whatever mass, and throws it off a ramp, and then it goes wherever it needs to go in space. And that'd be great for things like returning things back to Earth, or just, sending things towards Mars, maybe. So I think that's one of my favorite forms of propulsion. It's just kind of unique to me, and I think it's very realistic. I think that's kind of the part that I like a lot about it. It's like, we can definitely do this. This is something we can do. We have the tech right now.
Wow. I'll have to keep my eyes out for that one. Learn a little bit more about that. The image we're looking at right now is International Space Station. And this is the image that lets us know we're going to transition over to looking at thinking about how to design the exterior of a spacecraft to be more compatible with what our needs are in space. I mean, if you look at a design like this, this really doesn't look like a spacecraft. It doesn't have, the ballistic shape or that, that arrow or bullet-like shape at all. It doesn't look like it needs to get through the atmosphere. But, NASA designed and built this with its partners to, meet the needs of the astronauts in low Earth orbit. And I think you actually touched on this a little bit, Brandon, when you talked about how there are different environments in which a spacecraft has to operate that will require different needs for propulsion. And, maybe the same thing can be said about, how we shape spacecraft for operation in space. Katie, if you can do the next slide, so that, maybe a spacecraft in space doesn't have to look like, what we think of as a typical rocket shape.
Yeah, no, and this is a great example. If you had something like this flying through the atmosphere on Earth, it'd probably just be really heavy, really hard for it to move around. But in space, because you don't have that friction, you don't really care as much about that. I love to use the Borg as an example. They just fly in a giant cube. There's nothing wrong with that in space. It really isn't. I mean, it's not creating any drag or anything. So yeah, if you want to fly around in a Borg cube, you can do that. It's okay.
It doesn't have to be aerodynamic. I think that's a really great point. Next slide, please, Katie. Yeah, and that opens the door for a more expansive thought about how would you actually design and build a spacecraft to be really functional for what your needs are. Here's an image of the interior of International Space Station. And for people who have not really had a good understanding of what the scale is and how much room there is, in the habitation and work modules in International Space Station, you can see an astronaut right there with plenty of room throughout the space station. Of course, it's jam-packed with equipment and such, but you can easily get a good view of what that interior is like. Next, please, Katie. But there are other ideas that have been brought along through science fiction stories about how spacecraft might be shaped. And in some instances, they really are rather expansive, like really, really, really large. And here's an artist's rendering of something that I think was meant to represent almost, a planetary sized space, manufactured space environment. And so as you look at this image, you can see greenery and waterscapes and buildings and all sorts of things in a structure that seems to go up and curve away from us in the far distance. And I remember that there was a series of stories written by Larry Niven called Ring World. And we can go to the next slide, please, Katie, in which there was a manufactured planet, if you will, in the shape of a ring that surrounded a star at a specific distance. And in this particular shape, people could live and work in an environment that was similar to what would be necessary for a Goldilocks kind of location around a star, where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And because of the size, the atmosphere supply would be held in the ring simply because of the spin of the ring around the star. The centripetal force would hold the gases inside. And so here's one of those instances. Do you ever imagine that something like this might eventually evolve?
Yeah, I'm 100% behind this type of stuff. I think that this is kind of the direction we should go in. And this kind of reminds me of the O'Neill cylinders that the late, I think Gerald O'Neill kind of came up with that concept. But this is super cool because, again, you're using centrifugal force to keep everything downward. And also, I like to look at it as it has to be big so that the spin, you really don't feel it. The bigger that the torus is, or the wheel is, the less that you feel the centrifugal force, and it feels just more normal. Whereas if you're in a little bitty, torus, you get dizzy. So yeah, I think this is great.
I hope we get to see something like this soon. I think we have one last image, Katie. But I hope, Brandon, do you, I mean, where we are right now in, our next steps to heading up to the moon with SLS, I'm sure you're hopeful that, what's happening now is going to lead to some of these fanciful ideas that we've seen here. This last image is an image of a Starfleet space station orbiting the Earth, and you can see there's a Federation starship in the background there.
Yeah, I think, so this outpost is super cool. It reminds me of the Deep Space Nine station in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is my favorite series. I literally named my dog after the captain of that station.
You are nerdy about this.
Yeah, but to answer your question, yeah, we're going back to the moon, and what I like about this time is we're going there to stay. We're really trying to be sustainable out in the solar system at this point, and it's going to start with the moon and us building more space stations. So I do think this time we will grow, and also not to bring up too much geopolitical things, but I think there's a big interest around the world right now to go to space, and I think as we saw in the last big space race, that had a lot to do with some of the reasons why we went to space. So I think with all that combined together, I think we're going there to stay this time and really build out and become a spacefaring civilization in every way of the term.
I think that would, I think that's a great way for us to sort of close out our conversation with the hope that we can really push in that direction. And, I hope that I know that the work that you're doing will help to inspire, young kids to think about the possibilities for them for careers in space exploration. And so hopefully, programs like this and the work that you're doing continue to push folks in those directions, young folks in those directions. So Brandon, I want to say thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope our audience has enjoyed it. And I want to wish you all the best in the work that you're doing. And, like you, I'm looking forward to what's going to happen with the SLS system coming up later this summer and later this year.
Definitely. Thank you for having me once again.
Thanks, Brandon. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Take care. Well, folks, I hope that helped you gain a little bit of insight into, how we think about the future of rockets of the future, if you will, where we might be going with that, what we're doing so far, how that's evolving to meet the needs that we had, and where we might be headed at some point in the future. Maybe the Star Trek universe, the Firefly universe, and others are, blueprints for where we might be headed in the not too distant future. So again, our thanks to Brandon. Great to have him on board. We look forward to having him back again. So what we want to do, folks, is we want to cover some of that content that we mentioned we would cover a little bit earlier. And we were talking a little bit about what's happening with James Webb Space Telescope. We were also talking a little bit about the Space Launch System and the Artemis update. And we covered that with Brandon pretty well, since he's right there at the front door of that. We managed to get that done. So let's talk a little bit about James Webb Space Telescope. James Webb Space Telescope, as you know, is on station. It's at location. And what's been happening since January and February when it arrived is that it has been commissioning its instruments. And that means that engineers have been setting up, configuring, if you will, how the instruments are meant to work and testing them to make sure that everything's working all right. And they have been able to confirm that all of the instrumentation is working as it's supposed to work. And as it turns out, we're expecting to see the first real science image next week. So on July 12th, next week, July 12th, which is Tuesday, we should be looking out to see that first image. And NASA's going to have a press conference introducing that image, and we can all check in on that if we simply go to NASA's website, nasa.gov. The day before, you can actually find out the exact time of the press conference, and you can follow along. You can sit in on the press conference and actually be among the first to see this first image from James Webb Space Telescope. We should keep in mind that this is an infrared telescope, meaning that it is looking for the energy that comes from the heat of objects. So I can't wait to see what that first image looks like. I don't know if it's going to look like a regular Hubble Space Telescope picture or what it's going to look like. But one of the things that has come out so far is that even with what's called the Fine Guidance System, which is a camera that's used just to help the James Webb Space Telescope navigate its position and hold its position and point and aim itself, even the images that are the test images coming from that are absolutely remarkable and showing images of the universe that have not been seen before. Even through that camera, scientists are gathering data and creating images that show the depth of the universe in infrared that hasn't been seen in this way before. So next Tuesday, we should be looking for that very first image coming from James Webb Space Telescope. So keep that in mind. So we've covered all of our updates. For the evening sky update, here's what we have coming up for evening sky update. In the evening sky update, we have great constellations. The summer constellations are available for us. If we're looking down toward the southern portion of the sky at around 10 p.m., what we find is we have the two constellations, Sagittarius and Scorpius, on either side of the Milky Way. So if you're out under clear, dark skies, you can easily see this sort of cloud of fuzzy sky that comes down from the northeastern corner of the sky, stretches over the dome of the sky, and heads down toward the south. And if you're seeing that, you're really seeing the arms of our galaxy stretched out into space in that direction. And as you look down toward the southern horizon on either side of the Milky Way, the S-shaped constellation Scorpius is over on the right-hand side, and the teapot-shaped constellation of Sagittarius is on the left side of that. Well, if you can use these two as markers, they're bright stars, allow you to identify the Milky Way. You can actually come up along the Milky Way and swing up toward the top of the sky, where you can find the summer triangle, made up of the brightest stars of the summer skies constellations. And that would be Vega, one of the brightest stars you'll see in the summer sky. It will actually appear as the brightest star, Vega. You'll also find Altair, a little bit to the south of Vega. And then up a little bit higher, you'll find Deneb. And these three stars together, the three brightest stars right at the top of the sky, make up the summer triangle. And each one of those stars belongs to a different constellation. Vega belongs to the constellation Lyra the Harp. Deneb belongs to the constellation Cygnus the Swan. And Altair belongs to the constellation Aquila the Eagle. What I love about those three stars is the relationship of their brightness. As it turns out, Altair is the closest one to us. It's about 16 light years away. Vega is about 26 light years away, not much farther. But almost equal in brightness is Deneb. But Deneb, even though it seems equal in brightness, is 1,500 light years away, considerably farther out. Well, just think about it. If it's as far out as it is, and it looks just as bright as the other two that are so close, imagine what Deneb would look like if we actually brought Deneb up to that close distance of, say, 20 or 30 light years away. It would be incredibly bright for us here on the planet. I dare say that we wouldn't even have a real night because that star would be so bright. So it's incredible to think of it when you actually look at those stars in the night sky in that way, where you're thinking about the distances between them. So for those three stars in the summer triangle, right overhead at about 10 p.m., just keep that in mind. Altair is 16 light years away. Vega is 26 light years away. Deneb is 1,500 light years away. Tremendous distance away. So you can see that gap as you look at the sky. In the pre-dawn sky, great time to see planets, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. You still have time to do that this summer. And if you're down at the shore or on vacation, take the time to get up early in the morning and see what's out there. Let's take just a few minutes now to see if we have any additional questions from our audience, and we'll answer some of those right now. What do you have, Linda?
Lisa would like to know, where can she find images of the asteroid that passed us by yesterday?
Lisa, you're looking for information, images about the asteroid that passed us by just yesterday. Well, you can always check NASA's website, nasa.gov, but you can also just do a search for that particular topic. Yesterday's asteroid that passed really close to Earth. Fortunately, search engines can work with that kind of information, and you can find some of that. We have a lot of asteroids in our solar system, even in the inner solar system where we are. Some of them pass close to us, some not so close. So, what we consider close, actually, Lisa, is when we get an asteroid that's closer to us than the moon is. The moon's at about 240,000 miles away from us in its average distance. And so if we have an asteroid pass by that's closer than that, we consider that to be on the close side. If it's farther away than that, say 500,000 miles or maybe 1,000,000 miles, not very close. And there are plenty of asteroids around like that. The good thing to know about it, Lisa, is that fortunately, NASA and other agencies around the planet whose job it is to keep an eye out for asteroids that might be on a collision course with Earth, we have not been able to identify any Earth-killing asteroids, at least for the next 100 years. So we don't have to worry about the planet being destroyed by an asteroid anytime soon. It's still possible that we could have a small object crash onto the surface of the Earth, like a large meteoroid, if you will, that turns into a meteorite when it strikes the surface of the Earth. And that could do some serious damage in an urban area, but nothing that we really have to worry about in full destruction of the planet. So keep an eye out for that. Next, please. What do you have?
Mike said he read that they're making diamond batteries out of nuclear waste that could last 1,000 years. Is that true? And if so, could you see a future hybrid engine using these batteries for spaceships?
Mike's wondering about diamond batteries being made from nuclear waste, and could something like that be used for a hybrid rocket system in a future spacecraft? Mike, I have to admit, I have not heard of diamond batteries being made from nuclear waste material. We really do need to find a use for nuclear waste, and hopefully that might be something in which we really could make use of that and find a way to safely dispose of nuclear waste and, to power a spacecraft. I like that idea, but I haven't heard anything about that yet. I'm going to do some research, Mike, and see what I can find out. Thanks for mentioning that. What's next?
Little Jessica would like to know, what is a good starter telescope or magnification level for a telescope?
That's a really great question. Jessica, you're looking for a starter telescope or a magnification that might work for you. I'd recommend starting with even a pair of binoculars. You might have binoculars around the house already, and those work really well for low powers of magnification, up to about 10 power or so. And that's about the limit for binoculars before you need a tripod to hold them. But binoculars are pretty cool. The moon looks really great in binoculars, and some of the planets, you can begin to identify some features. But if you really want to do a little bit more magnification, say up to maybe 50 or 70, just under 100 power magnification, then you need a telescope with an aperture, a lens size of about 3 inches. If you get to something bigger than that, you're going to be spending more money for something like that. But a 3-inch telescope will give you great views of the planets, bright stars, multiple stars like double star systems, the surface of the moon, of course, and even some nebulae, and under dark skies, even a galaxy. So keep in mind that when Galileo looked at the night sky way back in 1610 with a telescope he built, his lens was barely bigger than an inch in diameter, really small and really crude, and he could see a lot of really great stuff. So a telescope you find these days, 3 inches in size or more, will work out really well. Well, thanks a lot for your questions, folks. We greatly appreciate it. And thanks for being with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed our program. This has been the July 2022 edition of Night Skies at Home, the Franklin Institute's Night Skies at the Observatory program, right here online for you to use the information from to get you out under the evening skies. It's always great to be outside, enjoying the night sky. It's relaxing, it can be comforting, and it can give you a little bit of a respite from the hustle and bustle of today's world. And you can get out, think about, and fantasize about traveling out among the stars, traveling across the galaxy, traveling out into the universe. Think of a spaceship that you might design with a propulsion system you might think about putting together that might make you a spacefarer. So keep that in mind, folks, as you're outside under the evening skies. I hope you have a great time observing the skies. Don't forget to come visit us at the Franklin Institute. We are open, and we'd love to have you come down and check out Harry Potter the Exhibition. We have this great new Franklin Institute experience that's here for the summer, and you should come down and check it out. If you're a Harry Potter fan, this is the exhibit you need to see. Ours is the premiere of this exhibit, and it's full of all sorts of wonderful artifacts from the movies. It reproduces a lot of the familiar environments you know about, and if you're a Harry Potter geek, you need to come check this out. So go to our website and check out the information about the exhibit and sign up to come down and check it out. We'd love to see you there. Otherwise, folks, enjoy the rest of July. Get out and enjoy the evening skies while we have this late evening sunlight. And don't forget, the universe is yours to enjoy, so get out and look at it. My name is Derrick Pitts. I'm the Chief Astronomer and Planetarium Programs Director at Franklin Institute, your cool astronomer, inviting you to continue to enjoy the evening skies. Check me out on Twitter. If you have any questions, you can drop them there. And don't forget, as I said, if you had a question, we didn't get to it, I'll go through the comments and make sure I get back to you. Thanks for being with us again, folks. Enjoy the rest of July. We'll see you next month for Night Skies at Home.